In the heart of West Africa, a quiet rebellion is raging. And at the center of it all is a young soldier with revolution in his voice and Thomas Sankara in his blood. He came to power through a coup d'etat, but not the kind the West supports. Not the kind backed by IMF loans or photo ops in Paris. In just months, he did what few African leaders have dared to try. Expelled the French military, tore up military agreements, cut ties with Western financiers, and called out decades of neo-colonialism masked with freedom. To his supporters, he's the second coming of Thomas Sankara. To his enemies, he's a dangerous incident with a Pan-African agenda, and now they call him dangerous. Ibrahim Traore isn't just changing his country, he's challenging the global order and inspiring a new wave of African defiance. From Burkina Faso to the Sahel to the rest of the continent, his name is chanted by the defiant and feared by the powerful. But who exactly is Ibrahim Traore? What does he want? And why is the West scrambling to contain his rise? To understand Ibrahim Traore, you need to understand the land he comes from, a country that has buried more revolutions than any other on the continent. Burkina Faso, formerly Upper Volta, was renamed by Thomas Sankara, the iconic anti-imperialist who ruled in the 1980s. Burkina Faso means land of upright people. But since Sankara's assassination in 1987, orchestrated with foreign complicity, the country has been anything but upright. Over the past decade, Burkina Faso has cycled through 5 heads of state, weathered multiple coups, and seen large parts of its territory fall to jihadist insurgents despite millions of dollars in Western security support. In the midst of the chaos emerged Captain Ibrahim Traore, a soldier trained in the University of Ouagadougou and a seasoned artillery officer. He served in the northern Sahel, where villages were routinely terrorized by terrorists and citizens left unprotected by the state. But unlike many in the officer class, Traore didn't just take orders. He started asking questions. Why, despite billions in aid, was Burkina Faso losing territory every week? Why were French troops stationed in the country if attacks were only growing? Why was the country consistently topping lists of the world's most neglected displacement crises, with nearly 10% of its population forced to flee their homes due to violence and insecurity? And why were the nation's mines being drained by foreign companies while citizens couldn't access basic needs? No sacrifice will be too great to take this country out of the situation in which it finds itself. So our commitment is for a return to peace, and our compass will always be the people. This wasn't just a coup, it was a declaration of disobedience. Traore reframed it as a rectification of the previous military administration led by Paul-Henri Damiba, whom many accused of being too cozy with the West and too hesitant to break old ties. With no background in politics and no financial elite behind him, Traore leaned on something much older, Burkinabe patriotism and the spirit of Sankara. He began echoing Sankara's speeches, nationalizing narratives, and urging youth to rise, not with weapons, but with tools, imagination, and hope. But hope alone isn't what makes the West nervous. It's what came next that turned Traore into a geopolitical threat. Since gaining independence in 1960, according to data from the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, Burkina Faso has seen more coups than any other African nation. A whopping 9 successful coups, with at least a dozen failed attempts. Despite all these coups and counter-coups, everything changed for the country in 1987. That's when Thomas Sankara was gunned down and ousted in a coup plotted by his closest ally, Blaise Compaoré. The revolution that once threatened French mining contracts and Western dominance in Africa was silenced, and a puppet regime was installed. For 27 years, Compaoré ruled with the invisible to the naked eye approval of Western powers. Burkina Faso opened its gold fields to foreign corporations, privatized state industries, and the French franc was in full control. Burkina Faso became what scholars called a semi-sovereign state, outwardly independent but internally guided by external levers. Born in 1988, a year after Sankara's assassination, Ibrahim Traore grew up under the Compaoré government. But unlike many of his generation who fled abroad or retreated into silence, Traore chose to serve. What shaped him wasn't just military doctrine, but the realities of war in the Sahel. Since 2015, Burkina Faso had faced a violent insurgency led by Al-Qaeda-linked and ISIS-affiliated groups. He served in some of the hardest-hit regions, Lorem, Yatenga, and Saum, where state authority had collapsed, and French forces present in the country under Operation Barkhane rarely intervened directly to protect civilians. He, like Sankara before him, began seeing the war on terror, not as a security partnership, but as a cover for neo-colonial extraction. He began to question his own side. Something didn't add up. Missions were underfunded despite years of foreign military aid. Intelligence on terrorist movements was often withheld or delayed. French forces in the region seemed more interested in guarding mining corridors than protecting civilians. The contradiction became too loud to ignore. He, like Sankara before him, began seeing the war on terror not as a security partnership, but as a cover for neo-colonial extraction. He began to question his own side. Something didn't add up. Missions were underfunded despite years of foreign military aid. Intelligence on terrorist movements was often withheld or delayed. French forces in the region seemed more interested in guarding mining corridors than protecting civilians. The contradiction became too loud to ignore. In 2022, while serving under Lieutenant Colonel Damiba's transitional government, Traore grew disillusioned. Damiba had promised a new direction, but had refused to cut ties with France. French troops remained within their borders. Agreements stayed secret, and the people's suffering worsened. Traore listened, and when he marched on the capital in September 2022 with loyalist units, it wasn't just a coup against Damiba. It was a coup against the system. An unknown 35-year-old had just ousted a French-leaning general and declared that Burkina Faso would reclaim its destiny. Fast forward to today, Ibrahim Traore has openly embraced Sankara's legacy, igniting a revival of Pan-African pride and anti-colonial sentiment in Burkina Faso and beyond. In the colonial playbook, there's an unwritten rule. You can rebel, but only within the lines. Ibrahim Traore didn't just step outside the lines, he tore the whole page out. Within just 4 months of taking power, he expelled the French military from Burkina Faso, ending Operation Sabre, a counterterrorism force housed at a base near the Ouagadougou airport. He also terminated a 1961 military agreement that allowed French forces to intervene at will in Burkina Faso's internal affairs, a relic of colonial-era cooperation, deals still active across Francophone Africa. Le terrorisme, l'Afrique en a marre. The empire just got kicked out. Traore didn't stop there. He suspended and shut down French state media outlets like Radio France Internationale and France 24, accusing them of broadcasting disinformation and destabilizing narratives. He banned French NGOs involved in what he called intelligence gathering under the mask of development. Burkina Faso produces over 70 tons of gold per year, making it among the top 5 largest gold producers in Africa. But more than 90% of that wealth is controlled by foreign companies, mostly Canadian, British, Australian, and French. Traore's administration began auditing all mining contracts, reviewing concessions signed under Compaoré and Kaboré, and called out the gold drain that left the country underdeveloped while European stock markets profited. At the same time, Traoré also got plunged into a different kind of war, one waged in newsrooms thousands of miles away. The minute he took power, Western media outlets unleashed a barrage of labels: junta leader, Putin proxy, militant captain, rising threat. But here's what they often left out: that Traoré's rise came after the total collapse of trust in Western-backed governments. Instead of analyzing what brought him to power, they focused on painting him as the latest African strongman. After his government had suspended French media, the Western press responded with outrage. But here's the contradiction. In a country where trust can mean the difference between survival and collapse, information isn't neutral. It's tactical. This is why Burkina Faso's government intensified its crackdown on foreign media with a zero-tolerance policy towards biased reporting. After Human Rights Watch alleged that Burkinabe troops massacred civilians in 2 northern villages in 2024, the government swiftly suspended outlets like the BBC, Voice of America, and Human Rights Watch itself. Authorities also banned The Guardian, Le Monde, TV5 Monde, Deutsche Welle, and several others, accusing them of an orchestrated media campaign to discredit the armed forces. All their websites were blocked until further notice. Yet, Traoré has been gaining local support, with citizens seeing him as a protector from external manipulation and internal chaos. But even think tanks and analysts joined the fray. The Atlantic Council, Brookings Institution, and others published op-eds warning of autocracy, foreign influence, and regional instability. Yet many of these same institutions receive funding from Western defense contractors and governments with a stake in Sahel geopolitics, raising questions of conflict of interest. Control of information is control of perception, and perception shapes policy. If Traoré is seen as a liberator, he gains international sympathy. If he's painted as rogue, he becomes a justification for sanctions, isolation, or worse. This is why the media war matters, and in this sense, Traoré was already under siege long before a shot was fired. What truly frightens the West is Traoré's vision of a Burkina Faso and a wider Africa free from foreign dependency. His policies echo Sankara's philosophy of self-sufficiency, food security, and military independence. For decades, Western economies thrived off of Africa's dependence. Traoré's Burkina Faso threatens that economic model, serving as an inspiration for African countries longing for real independence. Then came the coup and assassination attempts. In December 2023, rumors of an attempted ouster of Captain Traoré circulated widely, though never officially confirmed. Diplomatic sources cited increased U.S. satellite surveillance over Ouagadougou around the same period. In response, Burkina Faso's elite presidential guard expanded from 800 to over 2,500 personnel within just 6 months. A senior Burkinabe officer, speaking anonymously, reportedly told Jeune Afrique, "We are not naive. We remember what happened to Sankara." Tensions further escalated recently when U.S. AFRICOM Commander General Michael Langley accused Traoré of diverting national gold reserves to finance his own security rather than the public welfare, the usual historical tactic to manufacture consent for an intervention. In a rejoinder, The Burkinabe government dismissed the statement as imperial propaganda and released a public audit denying the allegations. 2 years before this, Burkina Faso was suspended from ECOWAS alongside Mali and Niger under the banner of restoring supposed democratic order. This triple suspension coincided with the formation of a new Sahelian alliance named the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES for short, between 3 states focused on mutual defense, self-determination, and the expulsion of foreign military presence. While Western powers have labeled these states pariahs, surveys and expert analysis suggest strong public support in Burkina Faso for deeper regional integration with neighboring Sahel countries, despite escalating external pressure. Public support for Traore's administration has remained strong. Over 50,000 civilians volunteered to join the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, a number verified by the Ministry of Territorial Administration. What happens when a young African doesn't beg for aid, doesn't fear headlines, and doesn't wait for permission? You get Ibrahim Traore, and you get a new kind of Africa, one that's not waiting to be saved, but standing up to be sovereign. The question is, can the West tolerate an Africa that thinks for itself, that governs itself, that defines itself? Before Sankara, before Traore, there was a man who dared to dream of a United States of Africa. Check it out next. Stay curious, and as always, I'll see you next time.